It's always a pleasure to talk to our Oscar-winning filmmaker, Adam Elliot, with his latest stop-motion animation, Memoir of a Snail, achieving international as well as Australian acclaim, as well as awards. And it's my great pleasure now to be speaking to the creator of Memoir of a Snail, Adam Elliot. Adam, welcome to Movie Metropolis.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having me.
Now, this is such again such a wonderful film, and it's called part of the trilogy of trilogies, which with your short films and so on, and Harvey Krumpet, of course, your Oscar-winning film, and Mary and Max, your last feature film. Tell me about the inspiration behind the story, because that's always the key element of any film, of Memoir of a Snail.
Sure. Well, this one, well, it was so long ago, the details are sketchy, but it was about 8 years ago. My father had passed away and he'd left behind, like a lot of people do, a big pile of stuff, well, three garages full of stuff. And I became very annoyed with him because as kids, we all had to sort through it and take stuff to the tip and donate stuff to charity. But that sort of annoyance led to fascination with why, as human beings, do we collect so much stuff and fill our homes with things we don't need, and particularly the sentimental value that we place on objects. And that led to the extreme habit of hoarding, which for a lot of people is a very damaging habit and something they can't break. And so I started to read into the psychology of hoarding, spoke to psychologists, and really immersed myself in that sort of in that world. And at the same time, I was going through all my old notebooks and journals and came across some notes I'd made about a friend of mine who was born with a severe cleft palate, and how as a childhood she'd had a lot of trauma and was bullied quite a lot of operations on her mouth, yet turned out to be a very well-adjusted, extrovert, confident person as an adult. So these sort of two sort of fascinations sort of merged into this idea of making a film about a hoarder who has a cleft palate, but really the biggest problem in her life is actually the hoarding, and that the hoarding is a coping mechanism of dealing with a lot of loss. The thing I discovered too is a lot of hoarders generally have had a loss of a child or a sibling or a twin, and so that's where the twin aspect came in. So yeah, like with any sort of script, I do a lot of research and become quite obsessed with certain ideas and concepts, and I do a lot of research, which is another reason why my films take so long to make.
How interesting to hear that. And of course, you need to have a completed script, which I suppose started a number of years ago, as you said, before you actually start the animation process.
Yeah, so after the script, there's often times I wished I was a novelist because you finish the writing and that's it, you publish the book, end of story. But unfortunately, with filmmaking, we then have to spend years and spend millions of dollars making the film. So after we got the finance, I then went into the storyboarding phase and hand drew over 1,500 little storyboard panels, and then that led into the production design. So I wear many hats, and so I am also the production designer. I think as an animation director, we tend to be megalomaniacs. We are very wear many hats. So I did all the production designs, thousands of drawings, designing all the characters, props, and sets. And then we finally started making the film. So we moved into a big studio here in Melbourne at Docklands and started to employ the dozens and dozens of artists and artisans and camera people that we needed to make the film. And that process took about 18 months.
Wow, and it is such a fascinating process, but t just takes so long. It's just incredible. And as you say, it's great that you had production behind you. You had a budget. I noticed one of your producers is Robert Connolly. So you've got some really good people backing you in terms of making this second feature film.
Yes, I paired up with Robert Connolly and Liz Carney, who she and I co-produced. Robert executive produced, but his company Arena Media really is the infrastructure that holds us all together. And it's great having Robert because he really, he's had a lot of experience in the industry, but also how to stitch together the financing, which is really, in many ways, the most difficult part of the process. I often get told that what I do is very tedious. Animating is very, tedious. But I always say, look, the animating is the fun bit. It's the financing is tedious. And as you would know, in Australia, financing is very difficult, getting more and more difficult, which is why we're seeing fewer Australian feature films. So, it's always a struggle, but once we got the money, it was off we went, and Robert sort of stood back and just let Liz and I do all the hard work.
Well, hard work it is because it's the film has an incredible look to it, and as you say, production design, the objects that are used, etc., and of course the painstaking approach to the stop motion animation is just amazing. So, and overseeing all that must be great for you.
Well, yes, I often say now as a director, I really don't get my hands dirty anymore. I have all my wonderful artists who are making everything for me, and the animators, of course, who bring it all to life. So I think as a director, you're really just pointing a lot and making decisions. Yes, no, maybe. Yes, no, maybe. So I often say I feel like the ringmaster of a circus or the conductor of an orchestra, and my job is to make sure everyone's on the same page and they're they're understanding my vision. And I think that the biggest difficulty I have, particularly with features, is maintaining that vision and enthusiasm over many, many years. I mean, ultimately, we're just making a 94 minutes of entertainment, yet it takes years and years to do and millions of dollars. I mean, all feature films take a long time. I think the average feature film takes 7 years from script to screen. Ours took 8, so in a way, that's not too long a period. And of course, many films don't get up. A lot of them fall over halfway through. A lot of them never get financed. There's sadly, a lot of scripts on people's shelves of films that will never get made. So I consider ourselves quite lucky.
Oh, look, well, congratulations on that because it is a real achievement. And that whole bittersweet sort of component to the way that you write and tell stories and get audiences involved in something that is s- pretty unique, actually, in terms of the way you tell a story. I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah, so when I started writing, I was very insecure and like many emerging writers, felt many moments of self-doubt and having that imposter syndrome. But I learned very quickly, particularly from my animation lecturer at the College of the Arts back in 1996, who was Sarah Watt, a well-known director in her own regard, who's, of course, sadly no longer with us. And Sarah really made it clear to us as students that really will always forgive bad lighting, bad editing, bad sound, bad music, bad acting, but they will never forgive a bad story. And that's what it's all about. It's about a good story told well, and you'll never have the budget you want, you'll never get the actors you want. But if you really spend time polishing your screenplays, then the audience will reward you with sticking with the story. And and I always say to emerging people too, emerging students, look around you for inspiration. Don't try and, be too grandiose. Often the best stories are right in front of us. They're our family, our friends. And I always say, I joke and say I could probably make a film about every person I've ever met if I had the time and the money, because I think everyone has an interesting story to tell, no matter how dull they think their lives are. I think we are all eccentric in some way. We all have interesting aspects to our psyches and personalities. It's a matter of digging deep and finding all that detail, which, getting back to your question, is what it's all about in my films, is the detail. And I write in a very unconventional way in that I start with the detail and worry about a three-act structure much later on, and I don't obsess about plots. So I go through my journals and notebooks, as I said, and that's where I find my ingredients. So I know for this film, I went through and I found I'd made a note about guinea pigs. I thought, oh, I'll put guinea pigs in the film, and then I'd always knew I'd wanted John Denver somewhere in one of my films. So I get all these, quirky ingredients, and it's a matter of them stringing them all together into a coherent story, but also getting that balance between the comedy and the tragedy, the light, the dark, and that's the hardest part. I don't want my films just to be comedic. I really want them to explore challenging subject matter. I love that quote, without the dark, the light has no meaning. And I really believe that you really have to, comedy is often a release of tension. Laughter is a release of tension. And to get that tension, you need to really have the audience on the edge of their seats and deliver content that is visceral and challenging. And I often get that comment, well, Adam, your films are not for children. And I always say, of course, they're not for children. Animation's not a genre, it's a medium and a wonderful vehicle for telling any story you want. And I think it's just we've all been brainwashed by American, Disney and Pixar that animation is a genre for children, and it's not. And there's a wonderful long history of adult animation,
Mm.
as you would know, in the Czech Republic and Estonia
Yeah.
and France. So my films are very niche and boutique, but it's interesting with this film. I've been getting a lot of emails from young people who've just discovered my work, and I think my characters really resonate, particularly Grace really resonates with young people. She's an outsider, she's a misfit, and I think a lot of young people relate to her,
Mm.
particularly those who've just come through COVID who spend a lot of time in solitude. So it's a big relief to me to know I've got a younger generation of people watching my films.
That is excellent to hear. And I assume that no snails were harmed in the production of your film.
Oh, well, actually, Peter, every time I see a snail on the footpath now, I'm, so sick of talking about snails. I want to secretly crush a couple, but I don't. I love snails. I think they're such beautiful creatures. And actually, a funny story is that originally the screenplay was originally Memoir of a Ladybird, and the film was going to be about a woman who hoarded ladybirds. But then that film Ladybird came out with Greta Gerwig,
Uh,
and it's all getting a bit cutesy and twee. But also snails, they're a wonderful metaphor. You touch a snail's antennas and they retract into their shells, and they're introverts, and that's what Grace is. And so I love that sort of metaphorical element to snails, and also the spirals, of course, which are a lovely symbol
mm.
of life going full circle, very cyclic, and we wanted that swirl as a motif all the way through the film. So it took me a while, but I settled on snails, and now can't imagine the film not being about snails.
Absolutely. So, Adam, tell me about the actual objects, the physical creation of the characters, um, of
Yeah,
it's all right,
yeah,
of,
well,
and wonderful things like Luna Park and Canberra and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff that's production designed into your film, which is just superb.
sure. Well, there was I think we added up there was just the props alone, including all the snail props. Between we never counted, but we guessed between 3 and 5,000 of those were all handmade.
Oh.
Um, I think there was over 200 characters and around 200 sets. And I think I should point out too is that all my films have zero CGI, so there's no computer generated imagery at all. So
Yeah,
that meant we even had to do things like the flames were yellow cellophane,
yeah,
cigarette smoke was cotton wool. So we do what's called in camera. So we animate in a very traditional manner, and so we can proudly say to the audience, everything you just saw on the big screen is something you could hold in your hand. And it's funny because I was told I was pursuing a dying art form many years ago, and that computer animation would eradicate stop motion and kill it out. And but that hasn't happened, and in fact the opposite has occurred, and that is stop motion, I think, is going through a golden period and a bit of a renaissance, because Wes Anderson's making stop mo, Guillermo del Toro, of course, made Pinocchio, Tim Burton. I think there's a real appreciation of the art form because I think we are drowning in CGI, and particularly now with AI on the horizon too, there is a greater appreciation for art forms that are handmade, made by human beings, which is why we put at the end of the film on the very last credit, the credit roll, this film was made by human beings, just to remind people that you do need humans to make art.
Mm. Absolutely, and again, it's just so finely developed and so great to look at. And I must also commend you on your voice cast. I mean, you've used great actors' voices in all of your previous films, obviously Marion Max and Harvey Krumpet and all that. Tell me about the voice casting for Memoir of a Snail.
Well, originally, I really, the very first draft of the screenplay, I, I tried to not think about who exactly I wanted because there's a lot of pressure to get big name actors, and particularly the distributors and sales agents would love you to have Meryl Streep and Brad Pitt and all. But I try and block all that out and just think about what is it that is the essence of each character. What is the type of voice I'm after? And so I actually started to watch a lot of films with my eyes shut. I know that sounds absurd, but particularly Australian films, because I really wanted Grace to be voiced by an Australian. I didn't want a fake accent. Um, and so, of course, I listened to Nicole Kidman and Kate Blanchett and all the big female actors. But it was Sarah Snook very early on that really stood out because she has this wonderful shyness to her voice and a vulnerability. And I always love actors to not have to put on voices. I really just love their natural speaking voices. And because I'm after authenticity too, I really wanted the voice to ring true. So Sarah, yeah, she was a very early choice, and we were so thrilled to get her. Similarly with Cody, I rewatched him he's been acting ever since he was a little boy in films like Romulus, My Father, and he's done some big Hollywood films. And of course, then he came out in The Power of the Dog, and I love that subtlety he got in that performance and that brooding quality. So he became the obvious choice for Gilbert. And then with Pinky, it just had to be Jackie Weaver. There was no one else I could, she ticked every box. She had the comedic timing. She had that frailty in her voice because Jackie is now aging, and she just had to be Pinky, and that was a big worry because she lives in Los Angeles, and that's always a difficulty recording these actors. But she was in Sydney briefly, so we recorded her up there, and yeah, so it's a very eclectic cast. Nick Cave, of course, has a cameo. Then we have non-actors like Tony Armstrong, wonderful Magda Sabansky who plays Ruth. So a very diverse range of actors, and yeah, so thrilled we got everyone we want. Oh, and I can't forget Dominic Pignon, of
Yeah.
course, who plays Percy Puddle. The way we got him actually, I've become friends with Jean-Pierre Jeunet, of course, who directed Amelie and Delicatessen, and I actually wanted Jean-Pierre to do the voice, and he said, no, no, not me, not me, I can't act. He said, what about my friend Dominic Pignon? And I said, are you kidding? Of course so we were thrilled to get Dominic, and I'm going to Paris in 2 weeks, so hopefully I get to catch up with them both and see what they think.
Yes, no, they're all terrific. The voices are great. the stop motion animation, it all just comes together just so well. I'm interested in the way the film Memoir of a Snail is being received because I noticed London Film Festival. I think you won Best Film and Golden Globes. You've been nominated, and you're featuring in a number of lists or nominations in various film festivals and others. What sort of personal reactions are you getting from people from seeing your film?
Yeah, well, it's pretty diverse. As I said earlier, a lot of young people. I feel this film's connecting with a broader audience. Certainly not. It's not a mainstream film, but of course now with social media, they can connect with with me a lot easier, and it's wonderful reading all these messages coming in. You know, I've had messages from people with cleft palates, people who've lost a twin. But people who just, again, relate to Grace and Gilbert. But yeah, look, to be honest, I'm really surprised by how well the film's been received, not just from the audiences, but also critics, particularly in America. You know, there's always that challenge of particularly with Australian films reaching a wider American audience and getting a theatrical release, which we were lucky. I think we went out to about 500 cinemas. Um, it's funny because I always knew that we'd be okay in countries like France and Spain, which, you know, are not non-English speaking countries.
Mm.
But it's a challenge to get Australians to go see a film at the cinema and then Americans. But we've been really lucky. It's had a good, you know, release here in Australia with Mad Men and so yeah, so far so good. But I think with all these awards and accolades, I mean, they're nice. I always say an award's like a nice bottle of wine. It makes you feel good for 24 hours, but then you wake up and you just got to get on with the next thing. And for me, the most important part of this whole awards season is getting the next film up. So while I'm doing all these interviews, I'm also talking to potential investors and because I want to stay independent. I want to stay an auteur. I prefer not to have to direct other people's films, and of course there's offers coming in, but you know it's all about creative control and creative freedom. And I love living here in Melbourne, and I love working with my crew, my editor, and cinematographer, and animators. So I really just want to do it all again, and so if the success of this film opens a few doors and helps me get the next one financed, then I'll be able to sleep at night.
Fair enough, and keeping that control, especially as you are a niche filmmaker that makes distinctive films, I fully understand where you're coming from on that. In terms of your next film, which I assume will be another feature stop motion, um, have you got a story in mind, or would you prefer not to mention that at this stage?
Oh no, no, I think yeah, I think I'm tired of making films about people stuck in their bedrooms in suburbia. So I want to break free, and so I've decided I want to make a road film.
Ah.
And I've got a vague idea of what it'll be, a road film set in Australia, of course. But it's early days, but I can't wait to sink my teeth into starting that writing process. I've started taking notes while I've been in airports and on planes and things. So yeah, it'll be a road film. You know, probably take 10 years to make. I don't know. It could be my last film. I mean, I'm 52 now, and so they get harder. Weirdly, they get harder to make, not easier. I don't know. In some ways, I look back and think when I was a young filmmaker, I was a lot more naive, and what's that saying? Naivety is bliss. Uh, but you know, I love making them. They're always a challenge. Filmmaking's always a challenge. It'd be much simpler if I was a ceramicist or a portrait painter or something. But no, I'm pigeonholed now, and I've got my crew I have to look after and support. So onwards and upwards and sidewards, as Grace says.
Yes, great line. Lots of great lines in Memoir of a Snail, I must say. It's great stuff. And I suppose when the film is eventually released on DVD, Blu-ray, whatever, there'd be some additional extras and your commentary, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's. I feel very old saying this, but they're going to Madman are releasing a box set of all my films, like a
Ah,
retrospective, and I was a bit unsure about that at first. I thought, well, I haven't finished my trilogies. I haven't. I'm not dead, So, but I thought, oh well, anything can happen. So it's a thrill to just even have your films on DVD, but. Apparently DVDs are coming back and Blu-rays are coming back. So yeah, the film's gonna actually I think it's probably out soon. I know they're designing all the covers, but yeah, look, it's interesting. Animation has a long shelf life, and I think that's the beauty. One of the benefits of animation is that it does tend to not date as quickly, and I think having all my films set in the 70s also helps not date them as well.
yes, absolutely. And of course, having the physical film available for you to watch at any time, rather than having to keep on p paying streamers or whatever, is, I
Oh,
think, so much
yeah.
better.
Oh, I think that's what's happening is particularly young people who've been brought up on their devices and tablets and screens, they don't have this anything tangible anymore. So I think that's why, records and LPs have come back into
Mm.
popularity and even cassettes. I saw a young person the other day with an old cassette and that's very heartwarming because again, it shows that we are human beings. We don't want to live completely in digital worlds. That's why bookstores still exist. We still love the tangible, tactile nature of reading a book, and even going to the cinema. Apparently, young people are finally going back to the cinema
Mm.
because they've missed the communal experience, particularly through COVID. And so, yeah, that gives me hope for the future. I mean, there's a lot of things to worry about the future, but I think the fact that young people are enjoying cinema again and watching things on the big screen is gives me hope.
That is all good news. And I know, Adam, you're off overseas and taking your film to more places, more countries, more audiences, which is just terrific, traveling with your film Memoir of a Snail.
Yes, I'm off to the Golden Globes, which, have a checkered history, and I feel sort of mixed emotions. But it's great to be in competition with the big films like Inside Out 2 and Wild Robot, these big mega feature films acknowledged. It's great as an Australian filmmaker to be acknowledged, and
Hmm.
I'll keep fighting the fight and promoting my work as often as I can, and particularly connecting with new audiences who are a bit tired of the usual formulaic stuff that's out there, and as I said, I like to challenge my audiences, but I certainly like to entertain them as well. And as my dad always said, two things. He said, make them laugh and make them cry. And really that's been my simple ambition for the last 28 years. So yeah.
Well, you've certainly been doing that and terrifically. I'm very impressed. And we've been speaking to Adam Elliot, who's the writer-director of Memoir of a Snail. Still around at various cinemas and shortly to be on Blu-ray, DVD. Adam, as always, a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, Peter, and thank you for supporting my work for all these years. I love bumping into you at film events, and it's people like yourself who really make my life a lot easier. So thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Adam, thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thanks, Peter.